You know that feeling when your world shatters? When the person you vowed to spend your life with, your rock, your everything, pulls the rug out from under you in the cruelest way imaginable? That was my reality just a few short months ago. I'm Eleanor Jennings, and this is the story of how my own son abandoned me at a courthouse, or at least that's what it felt like. It wasn't a courthouse, not exactly, but the feeling was the same. The chill I felt that morning had nothing to do with the weather. The sun was warm, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. No, the chill came from the silence. A silence that screamed louder than any goodbye. I had drifted off in the backseat of my son Jacob's car. When I opened my eyes, we were pulling into a parking lot. It didn't look like a shopping center or a restaurant or anything I recognized. The building was long and gray, with large impersonal sliding glass doors and a generic sign out front that read Willow Creek Assisted Living. My throat tightened. I turned to Jacob, a knot forming in my stomach. "Are we visiting someone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, to pretend this was all a misunderstanding. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my gaze, and said, too casually, "Mom, they have your room ready." My mouth went dry. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I thought it was a mistake, that he was joking, that this was just a tour. Maybe even something his wife, Emily, had talked him into. But the bags were already in the trunk. My bags, the ones I hadn't packed. "I don't understand," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes still glued to the steering wheel, as if the lines on the leather held some profound secret he couldn't share. "You need more support, Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We just don't have the time anymore." No warning, no discussion, just a quiet decision made behind my back, sealed with a morning drop-off like I was an Amazon return, a package to be delivered and forgotten. He left before I even finished signing the paperwork. I walked in alone. No one held the door for me. No one hugged me goodbye. I was 63 years old, not 80, not senile, not a burden. But that day, I learned that being inconvenient is enough to get you erased from your own life. The woman at the front desk smiled gently, a practiced, almost pitying smile, and handed me a plastic folder. "Welcome, Mrs. Jennings. Your room is at the end of the hall, right side." I nodded, too stunned to cry. My shoes squeaked against the wax floors as I walked past rooms filled with strangers. I heard someone coughing behind a closed door. TV blaring a game show, the cheerful, artificial laughter echoing in the sterile hallway. Somewhere far off, a nurse was humming a tuneless melody. I entered the room, pale green walls, a twin bed with a thin, institutional-looking mattress. One window, offering a view of the parking lot where Jacob's car had disappeared. One chair, hard and uncomfortable. Just like that, I was gone from my family's story. But what they didn't know, what they didn't even bother to ask, was that the man they all seemed to have forgotten, my late husband Tom, had made plans. Quietly, intentionally, he had made plans. And what he left behind, in one sealed envelope, would turn this act of cruelty into their deepest regret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before everything changed, my days were slow, but full. After Tom passed away 5 years ago, I found purpose in the little routines that had once been just background noise. The hum of the coffee machine in the morning, the rustle of grocery bags, the sound of the local news playing low on the kitchen radio. I didn't have a glamorous life, but I had a life that felt mine. Every Thursday, I'd bake a lemon pound cake, Tom's favorite, and bring it to Jacob's office, even if he was too busy to eat a slice. It was my way of reminding him that I was there, that I cared, that even in his busy, important life, I was still his mother. Every Saturday, I'd pick up Sophie, my granddaughter, and take her to the farmer's market. She loved the fresh berries, the homemade soap stalls, the vibrant energy of the place. She'd squeeze my hand and tell me stories about her college classes, the boys she liked, the music she thought I should listen to. I gave her space to be herself, to explore, to dream. I didn't lecture, I didn't judge, I just listened. Sunday dinners were sacred. I made a roast every week, the kind Tom used to say, smelled like home. Jacob and Emily would come with Sophie, and sometimes even Emily's parents joined. I'd set the table with cloth napkins, candles, and the same ceramic dishes Tom and I had picked out on our honeymoon in Maine decades ago. No one ever said thank you, but I didn't need them to. Or at least, I thought I didn't. Back then, I believed that loyalty and love were loud in actions and quiet in return. I thought I was the glue that kept the family close. Maybe once I was. I remember one afternoon, I caught Jacob staring at an old photo of me and Tom. We were laughing, covered in flour from baking cookies. He said, "You really held us together, didn't you, Mom?" It warmed me, that simple statement. I held on to that sentence longer than I should have. When Jacob got his promotion at the real estate firm, I made him a scrapbook of every house he ever mentioned as a child, the treehouse Tom built him, the old Victorian down the street he used to call haunted. I thought it might remind him why he loved homes in the first place. That it wasn't just about the deals and the money, but the memories and the families that filled them. Flipped through it quickly, said it was sweet, and set it down on his desk, where it likely remained unopened and forgotten. Emily was harder to read. She was always polite, but in a clipped, performative way. She never said anything unkind, but she never asked questions either. Never really looked at me, not with genuine interest, but with a detached, almost clinical curiosity. Still, I told myself it was fine. Families evolve. People get busy. Love doesn't always look like it used to. I even made excuses when they started. Arriving late for dinner, when Sophie stopped texting back right away, when Jacob forgot to call on the anniversary of Tom's passing. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that it was just aging, that this was normal. But deep down, a quiet ache had started to bloom, a sense that I was no longer a part of their rhythm, only a nostalgic interruption they tolerated once a week. The last real moment of joy I remember was one spring morning. I was pruning roses in the backyard, the same ones Tom planted for our 25th anniversary. Sophie had come by unexpectedly and brought coffee. We sat on the porch, wrapped in light sweaters, and talked for hours. She said, "Grandma, I hope I'm like you when I'm older, quiet but fierce." I laughed, but the words stayed with me. Back then, I still believed that love, even when overlooked, would eventually be remembered. I didn't know yet that I was already being erased. Gently, gradually, as if my presence was a season they were ready to move past. I couldn't see the betrayal coming because I never imagined that the same hands I once held to keep safe, the same son I fed, bathed, and raised, would one day sign me away like I was an expired lease. The first moment I should have noticed something was wrong came in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Sunday afternoon. It was the weekend after Sophie's spring break. I had made her favorite chicken pot pie from scratch, with extra thyme, just the way she liked it. I even folded little hearts into the crust like I used to when she was in elementary school. The house smelled like home. My hands were flour-dusted, my feet sore from standing all day, but my heart felt light. Then Jacob called. "Hey, Mom," he said, distracted, his voice crackling with that half-present tone he always had when he was multitasking. "Emily thinks maybe it's time we try something different. Switch things up for Sundays." I paused, the warmth of the pie radiating through the foil in my hands. "What do you mean?" I asked, a flicker of unease starting to stir within me. "We're trying out this new meal service. Chef-prepped, organic, all that. Oh. It's easier, less work for everyone." I looked down at the pie in my hands. It was still hot, the crust golden, the filling bubbling through tiny vents. I had spent all morning on it, pouring my love and care into every ingredient. "I already cooked," I said softly, the words barely a whisper. There was a long silence. On the other end of the line, "I wish you'd have checked with us first," he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of any hint of apology. I didn't know what to say. My Sunday dinners weren't just about the food. They were my way of staying connected. My way of mattering. "Bring it over if you want," he added, but it sounded like a courtesy, more than an invitation. I wrapped the pie in foil and brought it anyway. I walked in through the front door like I always had, but this time, the house felt colder, less welcoming. Their dining room table was already set, sleek white dishes, tiny portions in glass containers, still warm from the oven. Everything looked picture-perfect, curated, like a magazine spread. Emily met me at the door, her smile strained, polite but distant. "Oh, you brought something. It's just a little something for Sophie," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful, to pretend that everything was normal. "I know she likes it." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the pie, then back to me. "Well, maybe just a slice. We're trying to cut back on starch." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Sophie hugged me. She still smelled like vanilla and lavender, the scent of her youth, of the girl I still saw beneath the college student. "I missed you, Grandma," she said, her voice soft, genuine. Single moment was the only warmth I felt all evening. As we sat down, Jacob placed the foil-covered pie off to the side, almost like a centerpiece, untouched. No one said anything about it, not a word. It sat there, the entire meal, like a memory no one wanted to acknowledge. Afterward, I offered to help clean, but Emily insisted everything was handled. I lingered by the door for a moment, waiting to be asked to stay longer, to share a cup of tea, to simply connect. No one did. When I got home, I opened the pie and had a slice by myself at the kitchen counter. The crust was still flaky, the filling rich and savory. I told myself they were. Just adjusting, busy, trendy, that families changed, and I needed to be flexible. But the taste felt different, hollow somehow, as if a vital ingredient was missing. That night I found myself standing in front of the pantry, staring blankly at the rows of cans and spices. I couldn't remember what I was looking for. I just stood there holding the edge of the door, thinking about how quickly things shift, how easily you can lose your place in the world. That Sunday wasn't explosive. No one yelled. No plates were broken. But it was the first time I felt like I didn't belong at my own table. And yet I let it go. I didn't bring it up the next week, when Emily forgot to tell me they were out of town for dinner. I didn't mention it when Jacob stopped calling on Wednesdays, just to check in. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being sensitive, that it was just one odd dinner. But deep down, I knew something had started to shift. Not all at once, but slowly, like a slow leak behind a wall. Quiet, steady, damaging. I did what so many mothers do. I minimized, rationalized. I stayed quiet. I didn't want to believe that the home I had helped build, the family I had poured myself into, was beginning to shut me out. But that pie stayed in their fridge for 2 weeks before they returned the container, still sealed, still untouched. There wasn't a single moment when the distance became permanent. It wasn't like a slammed door or an angry goodbye. It was quieter than that, slower, like rust, slowly corroding the bonds that held us together, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the pot pie incident, little things began to pile up, and none of them were loud enough to scream betrayal. But together, they began to suffocate me. It started with birthdays. Mine passed with just a happy birthday. Mom texts from Jacob around noon. No call, no visit, no cake, just those 4 words and a confetti emoji. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering when a mother's birthday became optional, a trivial event easily dismissed. I tried not to take it personally. Maybe he was swamped. Maybe Sophie was studying. Maybe Emily had the flu. But a week later, Sophie posted photos from a family brunch that same day. Mimosas, fresh waffles, big smiles. Emily had captioned it, "Celebrating family." I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even in the thought. The week after that, I offered to help with Sophie's graduation party. I'd already started planning decorations in my head. I still had the lace tablecloth from her first birthday party and the little twinkle lights she loved as a child. I imagined her delight, the warmth of shared memories. But when I called Jacob, his voice was clipped. "Emily's got it covered," he said. "We hired a planner." "A planner for a backyard party?" "I could at least bring something," I offered, hoping to find a small crack in their carefully constructed wall. He hesitated. "We don't want to overcomplicate things. You know how Emily is with her theme stuff? There it was again. That sense that I was an outsider, that my presence made things harder, not better. At the next family dinner, I sat at the end of the table, like a guest at someone else's event. Emily told a story about a funny thing her mother said, and Jacob laughed like it was the highlight of the evening. I tried to chime in with a memory about Tom, something warm and soft about his favorite tie, and how he used to whistle when he made coffee. But Emily cut me off. "Oh, that's sweet," she said with a tight smile. Anyway, what I was saying was ... Everyone turned back to her. My story died before it lived. Sophie met my eyes for a second. I thought I saw guilt there, or maybe discomfort, but she didn't say anything. She just sipped her soda and looked down at her plate. Oh. That was the night I stopped talking much at dinner. The house that once rang with my laughter, the kitchen where I used to stir soup while Sophie played at my feet, all of it felt sterile. Now, rehearsed, like I was attending a show I wasn't cast in. I started to notice things going missing from my own home, too. A favorite vase I'd set aside to give Sophie, gone. When I asked Jacob about it, he shrugged and said Emily thought it would look better in their foyer. No one asked. No one told me. I told myself it was nothing. A vase is just a thing. But it wasn't just the vase. It was the way Emily rearranged the furniture to make it more open, and Jacob agreed without asking me. It was the way they stopped calling my house my house. Suddenly, it was just the old place. "You should think about downsizing," Jacob said. "One day, you don't need all that space anymore." I looked around and saw everything Tom and I had built. Every photograph, every curtain I sewed by hand, every book he gave me with notes in the margins. And now it was just clutter, disposable. I started spending more time alone in the den. I'd sit by the window, watching the light shift through the trees, wondering when exactly I became someone they tolerated out of duty. And I realized something terrible. It wasn't just that they were forgetting me. It was that I had taught them it was okay. Every time I swallowed the hurt, every time I smiled instead of speaking up, I gave them permission to keep erasing me. And they were more than willing to take advantage of that silence. I began to feel like a shadow in their lives. It's always present, but never fully seen. And somewhere deep inside, the question I never wanted to ask began to form. If I disappeared tomorrow, how long would it take them to notice? It happened on a Sunday afternoon in May. The weather was beautiful. A warm sun, light breeze, the kind of day meant for joy. Jacob and Emily were hosting a garden lunch for Sophie's scholarship announcement. She'd been accepted into a university out of state with honors, and everyone was celebrating. I wore my softest floral dress, the one Tom always said brought out the green in my eyes. I even had my hair done that morning. Nothing fancy, just a soft curl, a little blush. I told myself this was a happy occasion. I'd see family, feel part of something again. When I arrived, the garden was already buzzing. People were laughing, music was playing, and servers in black aprons passed around mini quiches on silver trays. I brought a handmade scrapbook I'd created. For Sophie, pages filled with her drawings, awards, and little notes she'd written to me over the years. I'd even stitched the cover myself. As I walked up the stone path, Emily caught sight of me. She gave a quick smile, tight, polite, and gestured for me to come around to the side. "Hi, Eleanor," she said quickly, glancing over my shoulder. "Oh, is that a gift?" "It's a scrapbook," I said, holding it up, my voice filled with quiet pride. "Just a little something for Sophie, from when she was a little girl all the way through." "High school." Emily's eyes flicked down at it, unreadable. "Cute," she said. "Maybe put it with the others inside." I stood there a moment, waiting. I had imagined presenting it to Sophie myself. I had imagined her flipping through the pages, laughing, maybe even crying. Instead, Emily plucked it gently from my hands and handed it off to someone I didn't recognize. "Can you just toss this with the rest of the guest table stuff?" "Toss it." I stood frozen. She didn't mean it literally, of course, but the words still punched me. I watched the young man walk off with it, placing it on a table inside among wrapped boxes and sealed envelopes. Mine looked out of place, soft, handmade, unwrapped, forgotten already. I found a chair near the back under a tree. No one greeted. Me. I waved at Sophie, and she smiled, a genuine loving smile. But she was surrounded by friends, professors, and her boyfriend's family. I didn't want to interrupt. Then came the moment I still hear in my head some nights. Someone stood and raised the glass for a toast. It was Emily's father, a man who always carried himself like he was too important for small talk. He smiled, looked out over the group, and said, "Let's all raise a glass to Sophie, a bright young woman with a brilliant future thanks to the guidance of her incredible parents and family." He motioned toward Jacob and Emily. "You've raised a phenomenal young lady. You should be so proud." Applause. Glasses clinked. Laughter. No mention of me. Not even a nod in my direction. I sat very still. I tried to keep my smile frozen in place. Hey, but then I heard Emily, just behind me, whispering to someone I didn't recognize, "She really shouldn't be here so long. She gets tired easily. We worry." The words hit me like ice down my back. That's how they talked about me now. As a frail old woman who needed managing, as a burden to monitor, as someone to be pitied and kept quiet. The woman next to her nodded. Sympathetically. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "You get stubborn at that age. I stood up slowly, quietly. I walked to the front of the house and sat on the porch swing. No one followed. No one asked where I went. I watched the guests sip wine and nibble hors d'oeuvres. My scrapbook remained unopened on the side table. I stayed on that swing until the sun began to dip behind the trees. Then I walked home. No one offered me a ride. No one even noticed I had left. That day something broke in me. Not in anger, not in outrage, but in sorrow. Deep, sharp sorrow. Because it wasn't just that I had been left out of the celebration. It was that no one even thought to wonder if I belonged in it. It happened the following week. There was no confrontation, no screaming, not even a warning, just a quiet decision made behind closed doors. A decision about my life, my home, and where I apparently belonged. I had just finished watering the garden that morning. The lavender was. In bloom, the rosemary thick and fragrant. Tom and I had planted those together our last summer. They were still thriving, even as everything else seemed to be falling apart. Jacob arrived just before noon. He didn't knock like he usually did. He used his key, the one I had given him years ago, a symbol of trust now used to orchestrate my removal. I was still in the kitchen when he walked in, his phone in one hand and car keys in the other. "Hey, Mom," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Jacob," I said, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming by." He nodded toward the hallway. "Can we sit for a minute?" I knew that tone. That hollow, rehearsed tone that preceded difficult, one-sided conversations. We sat in the living room, or rather, I sat. He stood, pacing slightly, avoiding eye contact. "I've been thinking a lot about your future," he began, his voice flat, devoid of genuine concern. "You've been saying the stairs are getting harder, you forget appointments sometimes, and you're alone a lot?" "I'm managing," I said gently, trying to inject a note of calm into the escalating tension. "I always have." He sighed, a sound of exasperation more than empathy. "It's time for something more stable, somewhere you can have people around if something goes wrong." I felt my fingers curl slightly around the edge of the armchair. The truth began to dawn on me, cold and stark. "You mean a home?" "That," he said quickly, almost defensively. "It's a residence. You'd have a private room, meals, activities, medical staff, everything you need." "Need, Jacob?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to remain composed. "Or everything you don't want to deal with anymore?" He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "That's not fair. Emily and I have been stretched thin. Sophie's leaving. House is too much for you. You don't have anyone around. It's for your own good." My voice cracked again, this time betraying the deep pain welling up inside me. "You could have talked to me. We could have made a plan together. This is my home." But he was already looking past me, his gaze distant, already moving on to the next task on his mental checklist. "Everything's packed." I blinked, trying to process his words. "What? Just the essentials? The rest we'll sort later." "I've got the car running. You've already packed my things," I whispered, the absurdity of it hitting me. He nodded. Emily helped. Stood slowly. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. My knees felt weak, but I held myself upright, refusing to collapse. "You made this decision for me?" "It's temporary," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Just until things settle." But I knew the truth. The only thing they wanted to settle was me. Quietly, conveniently, out of the way. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even resist. I walked into my bedroom, or what was left of it. The bed was stripped bare, a ghost of its former self. A small suitcase sat on the edge of it. My favorite blue sweater, neatly folded on top. Next to it, a folder labeled with my name. He watched as I picked it up, still silent. A silent observer to his own act of displacement. I moved slowly through the house one last time. I touched the wooden banister Tom carved by hand, ran my fingers across the kitchen counter where Sophie used to sit and giggle while eating cookie dough. I looked at the wall of framed photos, my wedding, Jacob as a baby, Sophie in kindergarten, and realized not a single one had been packed. My entire life reduced to the things someone else decided I was allowed to keep. I walked out the door with only that suitcase. The car ride was silent. Jacob played talk radio like it was just another errand, a chore to be completed. Stared out the window at the town I'd lived in for over 3 decades. Every street held a memory, a milestone. Now I was passing through. It, like a stranger, banished from my own history. When we arrived, the parking lot was quiet. A staff member met us at the door with a clipboard and a polite smile. Jacob didn't come inside. He kissed the top of my head, a fleeting, almost perfunctory gesture, said, "You'll be okay, Mom," and handed me off like I was luggage. He didn't look back. As the sliding doors closed behind me, I took one last look at the sky. The sun was shining, the breeze was warm, and I had never felt so cold. They thought they had removed me from their lives with a clean, quiet decision. What they didn't know was that the woman they abandoned wasn't as alone or as powerless as they believed. My first night at Willow Creek felt like falling into a hole that had no bottom. The room was sterile, beige, and eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the air vent and the occasional shuffle of slippers in the hallway. My suitcase sat unopened at the foot of the twin bed. I hadn't unpacked. I didn't want to. To unpack would mean accepting that I now lived here, that this was my new reality. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, staring at the wall. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was something worse. Nothing. A heavy, paralyzing emptiness. Like I'd been erased from the world without anyone noticing. There was a whiteboard next to the door that read, "Welcome, Eleanor," in bright blue marker with a little smiley face drawn beneath it. I stared at it until the forced cheerfulness made me feel sick. I wiped it clean with a tissue, leaving a faint smudge where the smile had been. Later that night, I wandered the halls, not because I had anywhere to go, but because sitting still hurt more than walking. I passed open doors. Some residents watched. Television, their faces illuminated by the flickering blue light. Ads! Others lay curled under their covers, lost in their own worlds. One woman sat in a wheelchair, humming softly to herself, staring out a darkened window. No one looked at me. No one knew me. No one cared. Back in my room, I sat in the armchair and opened the paper folder Jacob had handed me. Inside were pamphlets, a guide to adjusting to assisted living, a list of daily activities at Willow Creek, and what to expect your first 30 days. There was also a short note in Jacob's hurried handwriting. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. Try to give this a real chance. We'll check in next week. Love, Jacob." I read it twice. Then I folded it in half and placed it carefully in the trash, as if disposing of a broken promise. That was the first night I cried. Not the soft cinematic tears you see in movies, but the kind of weeping that starts from somewhere deep inside and refuses to stop. I cried for every meal I cooked that went unappreciated. For every story I tried to tell, but was interrupted. For every time I swallowed my pain so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I cried for Tom, who had always made me feel seen, truly seen. For the garden I might never walk through again. For my life, which had been lifted away from me in pieces. until I was left sitting in a room I didn't choose, surrounded by silence. And then, as if life wanted to twist the knife, I heard a voice through the paper-thin wall next to me. A nurse talking to another resident. "She's lucky," the nurse said. "Her son calls every day. Lucky." I wiped my face and lay down on the stiff mattress, facing the window. But I didn't sleep. The next morning, I dressed slowly and made my way to the cafeteria. The room buzzed with soft chatter, clinking cutlery, and the occasional cough. I got a tray of scrambled eggs and lukewarm coffee. I sat alone. No one joined me. I didn't mind. I didn't want small talk. I was invisible again. And yet, there was something oddly familiar about this version of isolation. It's not just here, but before. At Jacob's dinner table, at Sophie's celebration, even in my own home. I realized something difficult that morning. I had been disappearing long before I ever arrived at Willow Creek. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I spent the next few days on autopilot. Wake up, dress, eat, sit, walk, sleep, repeat. Bother calling Jacob. He didn't call me either. A week passed, then 2. No Sophie, no Emily, not even a text. It was as if I had died and they had simply moved on, continuing their lives without a backward glance. I stopped going to the common room. I skipped the crafts and trivia hours. I ate in silence, then returned to my room, where I stared at the ceiling fan, its slow rotation, the only thing that seemed to move anymore. Rock bottom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietness of a room no one visits. Sometimes it's a calendar, full of empty squares. Sometimes it's realizing the people you loved most have a version of life that doesn't include you anymore. And yet, in that emptiness, something strange started to take shape. Not hope, not yet, but a kind of space. A silence that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel imposed on me. It felt available, like maybe I had nothing left to lose. And for the first time, that meant I could begin thinking for myself again. But it would take one unexpected discovery to pull me out of that silence. When I found it, everything began to change. It started with a knock, not on my door, but on my mind. A restless throb that wouldn't leave me alone. I had spent nearly 3 weeks at Willow Creek, moving through each day like a ghost. I rarely spoke. I rarely smiled. The staff had stopped asking if I wanted to join bingo or painting hour. I think they had begun to understand, or at least accept, that I was one of those residents who preferred to be left alone. But one afternoon, as I reached into the nightstand to grab my reading glasses, my fingers brushed something unfamiliar. It was wedged flat beneath a stack of untouched crossword puzzles, and my old church bulletin, thick, slightly stiff, like cardstock. I pulled it out slowly. An envelope, cream-colored, slightly yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my husband Tom's handwriting, unmistakable, elegant and firm. Eleanor, all capital letters. No date, no return address, just my name. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. I had packed away most of his things, but carefully, reverently. Not because I wanted to erase him, but because leaving his belongings scattered around the house made the silence louder, its absence more profound. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. My hands trembled. A folded letter and a second sealed document, thinner paper, typed legal-looking. I unfolded the letter first. Mara, it began, but then crossed out. And Eleanor written above it, a testament to his familiar habit of sometimes mixing up our names when he was deep in thought. If you're reading this, then something happened that I prayed never would. But I've learned that life doesn't always follow our plans. You were always the heart of our home. And if for some reason that home is no longer yours, this is for you. I updated the will before my last surgery. I didn't. Want to tell you then? You had enough on your shoulders, and you always believed the kids would do right by you. But I had my doubts, Eleanor, especially about Jacob. I've seen how he talks to you when he thinks you're not listening. I've seen the way Emily cuts you. Off at the dinner table, you gave them everything. If they ever forget that, I wanted to make sure you'd still have something. Inside is a copy of the new will. My lawyer, David Lell, has the original on file. Jacob doesn't know it, but I signed. Over my shares in the real estate company to you. Every last one, they're yours. The house is still in your name, too. I never let him transfer it. He thinks he did, but the papers were never filed. You're not as powerless as they want you to believe. I love you. I always have, Tom. By the time I finished reading, my vision had blurred. Not from tears of pain, but from something I hadn't felt in weeks. Recognition. It was like Tom had reached through time to put his hand on my shoulder and say, "You still matter. I see you." I carefully unfolded the legal document. It was dated just 2 weeks before his last hospital visit. The signature was there and under. It mine, from a conversation I barely remembered when he asked me to sign something just in case. He hadn't been vague out of secrecy. He had done it to protect me from worry, from the burden of knowing his doubts. He had known. Tom had left me everything, not out of bitterness, but out of love. Love and concern and foresight. The real estate company. The house. A trust fund I didn't even know existed. Quiet power, waiting for the moment I needed it most. I sat in that chair, clutching the envelope to my chest, as warmth spread through me like sunlight through a dark room. For the first time since arriving at Willow Creek, I felt awake. Not rescued, not vengeful, just aware. The ground beneath me felt steady again. I wasn't just someone's forgotten mother. I wasn't an aging burden tucked away to make life more convenient for others. I was Eleanor Jennings, and I still had a voice. I still had rights. Tom, even in death, had made sure I wouldn't be silenced. I spent the rest of that night reading and rereading every word. I didn't call anyone. Didn't march to the front desk or start packing my bags. It's not yet. But I sat taller. And for the first time in weeks, I turned on the bedside lamp, opened the drawer again, and started making notes. Because the silence they had pushed me into had ended, now it was my turn to choose what came next. The morning after I found Tom's letter, something inside me shifted. It was small at first, a subtle awareness, but it grew quietly, like a sunrise behind closed curtains. I got out of bed and made the sheets with a kind of care I hadn't bothered with since I arrived. I tucked in each corner, fluffed the pillow, and wiped down the small table near the window. Not for anyone else, not for show, for me. Because, for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, I felt like myself again. Not the shell of a woman Jacob and Emily had quietly boxed up and relocated. Not the shadow sitting alone in a cafeteria corner. Not the invisible presence no one remembered. To call. I was still here, and more importantly, I still had agency. The world hadn't ended when they pushed me out, but their version of my life had, and that realization didn't break me. It freed me. That afternoon, I put on a blue button-down blouse, one Tom always liked, and a string of faux pearls I had tucked in a side pocket of my suitcase. I looked in the mirror for the first time since I arrived. Really looked. The woman staring back wasn't pitiful. She looked tired, yes, but she looked present, awake, a glimmer of defiance in her eyes. I opened my notebook and made a list. I titled it, What I Still Control. It was simple at first. My story, my voice, my money, my decisions, my home. Then, I wrote a second list. What they don't know. I own the house. I control the real estate company's shares. I have access to Tom's trust. I still remember everything. And then, at the bottom of the page, I wrote, I am not theirs to discard. That sentence stopped me. My hand hovered over it like it was something sacred. Because it was. It was the first time I had ever told myself the truth without softening. It without making excuses for their behavior, without telling myself they were busy or doing their best. They hadn't done their best. It had made me small to make their lives easier, and I had allowed it not because I was weak, but because I believed, naively perhaps, that love meant selflessness. That giving without question was noble, that being needed was the same as being valued. But now, with a letter folded in my purse and Tom's voice echoing in my heart, I saw it differently. Love does not mean disappearance. Love does not mean silence. Love, at its core, is mutual. It sees, it listens, What they had given me was not love. It was obligation. The moment I became inconvenient, they cast me aside like a piece of old furniture. But Tom had loved me quietly, steadily, completely. His gift wasn't just financial. It was a declaration. You matter, even if they forget. I didn't. With that truth anchored deep in me, I began to act differently. I walked with purpose. I looked people in the eye. When the receptionist asked if I wanted to sign up for chair yoga, I didn't say no out of bitterness. I smiled and said, not today, but maybe next week. 'Cause now I wasn't just waiting. I was deciding. I pulled out an old address book and called David Lell, Tom's lawyer, from the hallway phone. He remembered me immediately. His voice softened when I said who I was. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said. We arranged a meeting discreetly. No announcements, no dramatic exits, because I didn't need to make noise to reclaim my power. I just needed to start using it. Every day after that felt like a quiet rebuilding, a reconstruction of self from the ashes of everything they had tried to take. I didn't rush. I didn't tell anyone. I simply began preparing, gathering information, reestablishing control, learning what was mine and what was never theirs to touch. And with every step, I felt the fire return, not as rage, but as resolve. I wasn't planning revenge. I was restoring myself. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking to be invited back into their world. I was building my own. If they had called, they might have noticed the difference in my voice. If they had visited, they might have seen it in my eyes. But no one called. No one came. And so I worked quietly. Power, I was learning, doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's a quiet decision made in the stillness of morning. A signature on a form. A phone call made while folding socks. A name added or removed from a list. The first thing I did was meet with David Lell, Tom's longtime attorney. I had called him from the hallway phone at Willow Creek, pretending it was just a chat with Anne. Old friend. No one there paid much attention to my calls anyway. I was just another resident making mundane small talk, fading into the background. David met me at a small, unassuming coffee shop near the facility. I wore a simple cardigan and a modest necklace, looking like any ordinary woman meeting a friend for lunch. But inside, I was holding decades of heartbreak in one hand and Tom's letter, my newfound blueprint for reclamation, in the other. He greeted me warmly, his eyes softening as he recognized me. You look well, Eleanor, he said, a genuine note of surprise in his voice. Perhaps expecting to see a woman utterly defeated. I'm trying, I replied, sitting across from him. The small round table feeling like a fortress around us. A private space where my true self could emerge. Thank you for holding on to this all these years. I pushed the cream-colored envelope with Tom's unmistakable handwriting across the table towards him. He nodded, a quiet understanding dawning in his eyes as he recognized the envelope. Your husband was a quiet man, Eleanor, but he was deliberate. He made sure the protections were airtight. His words were a balm, affirming Tom's foresight. And my own emerging strength? We reviewed the updated will together. The language was meticulously clear. I was the sole beneficiary of Tom's shares in the real estate partnership, the trust account, and most importantly, our home. Jacob, it stated unequivocally, had no legal claim to any of it. My house, the property they had so casually taken from me, was still entirely mine. David walked me through the next steps, explaining the legal processes with a calm, reassuring tone. If you want to reassert legal occupancy of your home, we can issue a formal letter of intent and begin the process of reclaiming the property. We can do it quietly if that's your preference. I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached my eyes for the first time in weeks. Quiet is exactly what I want, David, I confirmed. My power didn't need to be loud, just needed to be effective. Over the next several days, I signed documents. Papers that legally affirmed my rights, that set in motion the quiet machinery of justice. We set up bank transfers, consolidating the assets Tom had left me into accounts I controlled. We notified Tom's former business partner, a seasoned professional, named Arthur Vance, who had always remained respectfully silent and professional since Tom's passing. Arthur was surprised to hear from me, Pleasantly surprised, I might add. Apparently, Jacob had tried to access the company's shares months ago, presuming they were his, but had been denied access, with no explanation given.
Oh.
I understood why. The trust was activated, flowing into my name. My name was reinstated as the majority shareholder of the real estate business. Financial control was mine again. One afternoon, sitting in my sterile room at Willow Creek, I made a list. I cataloged everything that had been removed from my home after Jacob pushed me out. The blue vase they'd taken for their foyer. The framed wedding photo that disappeared from my mantelpiece. The lace curtains I'd sewn by hand. The hand-carved bookshelf Tom built the year Sophie was born. Then, I had David's office draft a polite but firm letter, formal request, demanding the return of all personal items belonging to Eleanor Jennings, as well as a strict timeline for Jacob and Emily to vacate the premises. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple, undeniable statement of rights. I didn't tell the staff at Willow Creek about any of this. I didn't mention it to anyone during mealtime or while walking the hallways. This wasn't for show. It wasn't about theatrics or garnering sympathy. It was about sovereignty. My life quietly reassembled, piece by piece, away from their watchful, dismissive eyes. I bought a new phone, not the basic flip one Jacob had set up for me, but a smartphone with full access to banking, email, and even social media. I logged into my old accounts, changed my passwords, and for the first time in years, I unfollowed Jacob and Emily on social media, not out of spite, but out of clarity. They had built a life that didn't include me, and I no longer felt the need to watch it unfold, to subject myself to their curated happiness. I also opened a small savings account in Sophie's name. She didn't know it yet, but someday she would. I hadn't forgotten her kindness, her quiet glances across the room when I felt invisible. She was young, yes, impressionable, but not unfeeling. I wanted her to know, someday, that I remembered her empathy. By the end of the month, I had everything I needed in place: financial control, legal clarity, and a growing sense of peace of mind. No revenge, no shouting, just quiet, deliberate reclamation. The only person I truly confided in, the only one who knew the full depth of my silent revolution, was Tom. I would sit under the old oak tree outside the facility, the letter still, folded in my purse, and whisper, "I'm doing it, love, just like you knew I would." And in the gentle rustle of the leaves, I could almost hear his voice reply, steady and warm, "I never doubted you, Eleanor." They thought they had closed the door on my life, locked me away, and thrown away the key. What they didn't realize was, I still held the key. And now, armed with truth and Tom's foresight, I was unlocking it. The first tremor in their world was small, almost imperceptible to anyone but me, who had been keenly anticipating it. It came in the form of a manila envelope, unassuming yet potent, hand-delivered to Jacob's office. Marked legal notice. Confidential, it didn't scream or threaten. It simply stated in direct, informal language that all rights to the property known as 127 Willow Lane remained with Eleanor Jennings, and that any occupancy without explicit consent was to be considered unauthorized. David Lell had written the letter with meticulous precision, every word serving a purpose, leaving no room for misinterpretation or argument. Jacob, predictably, didn't respond at first. Days passed, then a week, but I could feel it, the subtle shift, like a fault line deep beneath the earth. He wasn't in control anymore, and the slow dawning of that reality would be more impactful than any immediate explosion. Meanwhile, at Willow Creek, I moved with a new confidence and inner serenity that radiated outward. I wasn't loud, I wasn't boastful, but I had a presence now. The kind that comes when you no longer doubt your place in the world. I signed up for the book club, engaged in conversations during mealtimes, and even asked the cook if they could season the green beans a little more, a small act of defiance against the bland, institutional norms. I helped one of the new residents hang her framed family photos on the wall, sharing a quiet moment of connection. One of the nurses, noticing the change, remarked, "You seem different, Mrs. Jennings." I simply smiled, a genuine, knowing smile. I just remembered who I am. The phone call from Jacob finally came, utterly devoid of the relaxed, assertive tone he usually adopted when telling me what to do. This time, was almost polite, laced with an unfamiliar hesitancy. "Hey, Mom," he began. "I got a letter from some lawyer about the house?" "Yes," I said calmly, my heart beating a steady rhythm of vindication. "David Lell, he was your father's attorney." Prolonged silence stretched between us. "Didn't realize you still had... ... double quotes. He paused, searching for words. "I thought we agreed. You didn't want to live there anymore." "We didn't agree on anything," I stated, my voice unwavering. "You made a decision. I'm simply correcting it." Another pregnant pause. "Emily and I have put a lot of money into the renovations," he ventured, attempting to shift the blame or perhaps evoke sympathy. "We've been preparing to list it for Airbnb." "I know," I interrupted, cutting him off before he could continue. With his justifications, "The permits were filed under your name, but the property isn't yours to rent, Jacob, and it never was." There it was, the sound I hadn't heard in his voice in years: uncertainty. The confident facade he'd worn for so long was crumbling. "Can we talk about this?" he asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his tone. "Of course," I said. "David's office is open weekdays from 9 to 5, and with that, I hung up gently, leaving him to contend with the immediate consequences of his actions that weekend. I made sure Sophie was added to my visitor list at Willow Creek. I hadn't heard from her directly since I had been moved in. But I knew her heart was different, and I knew that in time she would come, and she did. She walked into the facility. On a Tuesday afternoon, looking somewhat bewildered, wearing a college hoodie and carrying a vibrant bouquet of wildflowers. "I didn't know," she said the moment she saw me, her voice cracked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Grandma, I didn't know they put you here like that." I hugged her tightly, holding back my own welling emotions. "I know, sweetheart, I know." She sat with me for hours, asking questions about Tom, about the will, about everything that had happened. I didn't speak with anger, only with the unvarnished truth, laying out the timeline of my gradual erasure. When she left, she turned at the door, her eyes bright with a new resolve. I think it's time they saw the whole picture. I didn't ask what she meant. I simply trusted her. A few days later, Jacob and Emily received another notice. This one was more comprehensive, detailing the trust account Tom had created, and crucially, the active control I now held over the real estate business they'd hoped to quietly absorb. It was no longer theory, it was reality. And reality, when it comes late, stings with particular ferocity. Emily called next. I didn't answer. Her calls, unlike Jacob's, still held a lingering sting, a residue of her practiced politeness. Instead, I had David issue a formal agreement. They had 30 days to vacate the house. No extensions, no loopholes. If anything was missing, anything personal or sentimental legal action would follow. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want conflict for conflict's sake. I wanted restoration. And that's exactly what I was getting. Every time they tried to negotiate, to bend the truth, to appeal to some distorted version of the past they believed I still clung to, I responded with quiet, unwavering facts. The house was mine. The business was mine. My life was mine. They had made decisions for me without asking. Now they were forced to reckon with the fact that I had made decisions without telling them. The balance had shifted, not because I shouted, not because I fought dirty, but because I remembered something they never expected me to. I still had power, and I was no longer afraid to use it. The final confrontation didn't happen in a formal courtroom, though it felt like a judgment day for them. It didn't involve shouting or slammed doors. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon in the very house they had once removed me from. Was Jacob's idea to meet there? Probably because it still felt like his home. It's a familiar stage where he hoped to regain some control. But it wasn't his anymore, not legally, not emotionally, not in any sense that truly mattered. I arrived precisely at 3 p.m. David had arranged for the locks to be changed earlier that week, and the locksmith was long gone. I stood on the porch for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, then let myself in, not as a guest, but as the owner. The air still carried faint hints of Emily's designer. Candle, sweet fig, and cedar wood, but the smell didn't bother me anymore. Let her decorate. Let her light every candle she could find. I was here now, and the truth would burn brighter than any fleeting fragrance. They were already seated in the living room when I walked in. Jacob stood when he saw me, unsure of what to do with his hands, his usual self-assured posture replaced by an awkward stiffness. Emily sat rigidly, arms crossed, her face a mask of strained politeness, though her eyes held a flicker of apprehension. Sophie, bless her heart, looked relieved, like someone who had been holding her breath for too long and could finally exhale. "Mom," Jacob started cautiously, his voice thin, "we need to talk about how this is all playing out." "I agree," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, as I placed my purse gently on the side table. "Let's start with how you moved me out of this house without my consent." He sighed, a frustrated puff of air. "That's not fair. It's accurate," I replied, my gaze steady as I met his eyes. I then turned toward Emily. "You helped him pack my things while I was out grocery shopping. Did you even stop to wonder how that might feel?" Emily opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, stopping her before any excuses could spill out. "This isn't about apologies. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to clarify." I pulled the updated will from my purse, the original document. Tom's signature strong and clear, notarized, dated, and backed unequivocally by David's firm. I placed it on the coffee table in front of them, sliding it across the polished surface. "This," I said, tapping the paper with a single finger, "supersedes everything you thought you knew." Jacob didn't move. He didn't have stared at the document. His jaw clenched, his face draining of color. Dad left me full control of his business shares, the trust account, the house. "It's all here, Jacob. You made decisions based on assumptions, but assumptions don't hold up in court. Documents do." Emily leaned forward, her eyes darting across the first few lines of the will. Her face paled further, the color completely abandoning her cheeks. "You're really doing this," she whispered, the words barely audible, laced with disbelief. "I've already done it," I said, my voice quiet but firm, resonating with a newfound authority. They both looked utterly stunned, not because they didn't believe me, but because they never, in their wildest assumptions, expected me to act. Jacob ran a trembling hand through his hair, flustered, disheveled. "Really going to kick us? Out after everything?" "After everything, yes," I said, meeting his eyes, holding his gaze unflinchingly. "Because you didn't just remove me from my house, you removed me from my family, quietly, efficiently, without a word of gratitude or an ounce of dignity. You discarded me as if I were inconvenient clutter." I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I just stood there, calm, present, and fully in control of the moment, a silent force. "And Sophie," I added, turning gently toward my granddaughter, whose eyes were wide with understanding and perhaps a touch of awe, "you're always welcome. This will always be your grandmother's home." She nodded, her eyes glassy with emotion, silent thank you passing between us. Jacob tried once more, a desperate final plea. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought it was for the best." "No, Jacob," I said, cutting him off with a quiet finality. "You thought it was easier? You thought it was easier for you? There it was. It's a truth, unfiltered, simple." The silence after that was heavy, oppressive, but I didn't rush to fill it. I let them sit in it, let the weight of their choices press down upon them. Then I picked up the will, folded it meticulously, and placed it back in my purse. 30 days, I said, heading toward the doorway, my steps even and steady. "That's generous, considering how much time I had to leave." Emily stood suddenly, her composure finally shattering. "And after that?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and indignation. I paused at the doorway, my hand resting on the knob. "After that," I said, my gaze sweeping across the living room, "I repaint the walls. And I reclaim my life." Then I walked out, steady, composed, and free. Not because they finally saw me, but because I no longer needed them to. They thought it was over after I left that Sunday. They believed the 30-day deadline was the end of the story, that they'd hand over the keys, perhaps toss a few parting words, and walk away with bruised pride and a bruised ego, finally free of the burden of Eleanor. They were wrong, because Tom had left behind one last surprise, one final, intricately woven thread in the tapestry of protection he had quietly crafted for me before he died. It was a safeguard against exactly this kind of dismissive cruelty. It came in the form of a letter I found tucked inside the original will documents, nestled behind the dense legal pages. A simple sheet of paper, typed and signed, titled Addendum. Real Estate Trust Clause, Beneficiary Discretion. It outlined a clause that gave me full discretionary authority over how the real estate company's shares and dividends were to be managed and distributed. This wasn't just about my ownership of Tom's shares. This addendum gave me the unilateral power to revoke access, withhold payouts, or even dissolve Jacob's role entirely within the business. He had no legal standing, no inherent right to be involved, only a precarious position based on Tom's unspoken hope and Jacob's own presumptions. This wasn't merely about ownership. It was about ultimate control. It was the difference between having a key to the house and owning the entire blueprint, the very foundation, and that's exactly what I did, with David Lell's unwavering guidance. I filed the paperwork to legally remove Jacob from all operations tied to the company. It was swift, clean, and devastatingly effective. Jacob had never officially been a partner, David explained. Tom had only ever kept him on in an advisory capacity, perhaps as a test, or simply out of paternal affection, hoping Jacob would one day step up in a way that truly honored the business. There was no legal employment contract, no equity, just expectations. Expectations that were no longer my responsibility to meet, the illusion of his importance, of his earned place. Shattered with a few strokes of a pen, David sent the final documents to Jacob 2 days before the 30-day deadline expired. It was a strategic move, designed not for malice, but for maximum clarity and impact. The phone at Willow Creek rang before noon. Let it go to voicemail, watching the small light blink, a silent testament to the storm brewing on the other end. He called again and again, the frantic rings a stark contrast to the previous weeks of deafening silence. Eventually, he left a message. His voice was tight, cold, the previous politeness completely gone, replaced by a raw, desperate entitlement. Made your point, he seethed, each word laced with venom. You've taken the house, the company, fine. But don't destroy everything. I've got deals pending. You know how much time I've put into this? I listened to the message twice, not because I was considering anything, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure I heard what I thought I did. There was no apology, no ownership of his actions. It's just desperation and a deep-seated belief that he was still owed something, that his perceived effort negated his profound disrespect. But here's what he didn't understand. Justice isn't always about revenge. It's about recognition. And sometimes the most powerful justice is quiet correction. Not to punish, but to protect what's rightfully yours. And so I moved forward. I contacted Tom's old business partner, Arthur Vance, a man who had always respected Tom's vision and integrity. Arthur had been a quiet, almost reverent presence since Tom's passing, never intruding, always offering polite condolences when our paths crossed. I offered him first right of refusal to buy out Jacob's remaining interest, which by that point was nothing more than wishful thinking. A ghost of an expectation. Arthur was stunned by the revelation of Jacob's true lack of legal involvement, then profoundly grateful for the offer. He had always wanted a larger stake, a more active role in the company Tom had built. Within 2 weeks, the transfer was complete. The company was fully mine, free and clear, without a single lingering thread connecting it to Jacob. I didn't keep it. My days of managing a sprawling real estate empire were behind me. I wasn't looking to become a titan of industry. I was looking for peace, for purpose, and to finally live a life on my own terms. I sold it. The process was handled discreetly, efficiently, by David and Arthur, who ensured I received a fair market value for the shares. The check I received was nearly $1.1 million. A sum that just months ago would have seemed like a fantasy, utterly irrelevant to my confined existence at Willow Creek. Now, it was a tangible symbol of liberation. It's a testament to Tom's enduring love and my own resilience. I kept a portion to renovate my home which I planned to reclaim, not just physically, but spiritually. New floors, fresh paint, a complete overhaul of the worn kitchen that had seen so many forgotten family dinners. The garden, too, would be meticulously restored exactly the way Tom and I built it, blooming with the life we had cultivated together, not the neglect it had suffered. Every room would be filled not with fleeting trends or showmanship, but with memory, with purpose, with the vibrant echoes of love that Jacob and Emily had tried so hard to erase. The rest of the money, the vast majority of it, I used to create. Something new, something that would stand as my true legacy. I established the Jennings Fund, a grant specifically for women over 60 who've been displaced or pushed aside by family. For women who have been told they're too old, too much, or too inconvenient to keep around. It was a silent, powerful counter-narrative to my own story of abandonment. It was a way to ensure that other women, strong and vibrant, would not face the same quiet erasure I had endured. The launch announcement made a quiet splash in the local paper. A small but significant ripple. Just a short column on page 6, nestled amongst community news, featured my name. A photo of me standing serenely in the rose garden outside my house, already looking healthier. It's more vibrant than I had in years, and a quote that resonated deeply. You can erase someone from your calendar, but not from their story. Eleanor Jennings. I didn't send Jacob or Emily a copy. I didn't need to. The knowledge would reach them one way or another, in its own time. Sophie, however, framed it. She gave it to me during her next visit to the house, her eyes shining with pride and a quiet understanding. I read the article 3 times, she said, her voice soft. I cried each time. You did it, Grandma? No, I told her gently, my hand resting on hers. We did it. You were the only one who looked back. She blushed and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of her own small but significant act of loyalty. They're not handling it well, you know, she confided, her gaze drifting to the window, avoiding my direct gaze. I didn't expect them. 2, I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. But I didn't do this for them. I did it for me. And that was the profound truth. Because justice, real justice, isn't about retaliation. It's about reclamation. It's about walking back into the places where your voice was silenced and speaking with clarity. Not to demand space, but to own it. They gave me 30 days to disappear. I used the time to build a legacy they'll never be able to forget. And that is what justice truly looks like. I hadn't heard from Jacob since the final papers were filed, since the ownership of the real estate company officially shifted, severing the last professional ties he had to Tom's legacy. No calls, no messages, no surprise, visits, just silence. It didn't hurt the way I once feared it would. In fact, it was strangely peaceful, like walking through a room you used to live in, realizing the furniture is gone and finally understanding you don't miss it. The emotional entanglement had been far more exhausting than the solitude. But then, one Saturday morning, weeks after the last legal documents were exchanged and the renovations on my house were well underway, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had just returned from the local farmer's market in Maria Aurora, my arms full of fresh herbs and 2 small bouquets of fragrant lavender for the windowsills. The scent of rich earth and rosemary still clung to my fingers. When I opened the door, he was standing there. Jacob. He looked older, or maybe just tired. The sharp edges of his tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled dress shirt, its sleeves rolled up. He held a plain manila folder in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. An uncharacteristic informality that spoke volumes. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice tentative, almost hesitant. I said nothing. My mind went blank, searching for a script, for the appropriate response to this unexpected apparition. The morning sun, bright over central Luzon, highlighted the lines of fatigue around his eyes. I
I...
A stark contrast to his usual polished appearance. I wasn't. Sure either, I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the surprise fluttering within me. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then out toward the garden, which was now bursting with new life, the roses thriving, the lavender-eyed. Purchase starting to establish itself. You brought the roses back, he observed, almost in wonder. They were always mine, I said, a quiet truth in my voice. Just let them go for a while. He nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then he held up the folder. I brought the last of your photo albums. They were in a storage bin I forgot about, Sophie reminded me. I took the folder but didn't invite him in. My reclaimed space felt precious, still too fragile to be reinvaded by the past that had caused so much pain. He hesitated. Can we sit for a minute? I glanced at the porch bench, newly painted and sturdy, then stepped aside slightly, indicating the outdoor space. Out here, I said. He sat down slowly, a slump to his shoulders I hadn't seen before. I remained standing, a deliberate choice, maintaining a subtle distance. The morning breeze rustled the leaves of the mango tree overhead. I've been thinking a lot, he started, his voice a low rumble, about how everything happened. Waited. No preemptive forgiveness. No easy absolution. This was his journey now. I was wrong, he said finally, the words a strained whisper, about the house, about all of it. I thought I was helping. I told myself you'd be safer, but really, I just didn't want to deal with any of it. I let Emily speak for me more than I should have. I didn't stop to think how any of this felt for you. I just wanted it off my plate. There it was. The confession, the apology. Late, quiet, and imperfect, but real. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine, vulnerable for the first time in years. I'm sorry. I searched his face, not for regret alone, but for recognition. The first time I saw something different in his eyes. Not pity, not pride. Something softer, unsteady, undeniably human. I sat beside him, the wood of the bench. A solid boundary between us. You didn't just make a mistake, Jacob, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You treated me like a problem to be managed. I gave you everything I had, and when I needed your respect most, you handed me off like a chore. Nodded slowly, accepting my words, not arguing. I know. I don't need your guilt, I continued, and I'm not asking for a relationship you're not ready to give. His eyes welled, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. I want one. I don't know if I deserve it. You don't? I said honestly, the words cutting through the air with a surprising clarity. But if you're willing to earn it, I'm willing to listen. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning breeze tugging gently at the hem of my sleeve, carrying the fresh scent of flowering bougainvillea from my garden. You changed, he said, finally breaking the quiet. No, I replied, a small smile touching my lips. I just remembered who I am. He looked out over the garden again, his gaze lingering on the vibrant roses. Sophie talks about you all the time. She said the fund you started is getting attention. It's not about attention, I said, my gaze steady. It's about the women. Like me, who don't get a second chance. It's about letting them know they are seen, that their stories matter. Jacob nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, faded photo. It was one of Tom and me, our wedding day. Grinning under an arch of wildflowers, wind tugging at my veil. Found it in one of Dad's old boxers, he said, handing it over. You looked happy. I was, I said, the memory warm and clear, a precious echo from a time of pure joy. He stood to leave, and I walked him to the gate, the old wooden gate that Tom had built, now newly painted and sturdy. Before stepping out, he turned to me. I'd like to visit again if that's okay. Maybe, I said deliberately, one visit at a time. He gave a small smile, a fragile acknowledgement of the new terms, then walked to his car. I stood there while after he left, the photo in hand, the scent of lavender and earth drifting around me. This wasn't full reconciliation, not yet, but it was something more honest, not dependency, not desperation. Peace. The house is quiet now, but not the kind of quiet that used to ache. This silence is different. It feels full, gentle, like the soft hush of a page turning in a book you love. The sun spills through the kitchen window as I steep a pot of chamomile tea, the same blend Tom used to make on Sunday afternoons. The kettle whistles gently, and I pour it into my favorite cup, the one with the tiny chip on the handle. The imperfection never bothered me. Some things are more valuable once they've been through something. I take my tea to the back porch. The roses are blooming again, deep red, almost velvet, the kind Tom planted in our first spring together. I trimmed them back last week with new shears Sophie gifted me. She comes by often now, never out of obligation, always by choice. Planted a few new bulbs next to the walkway, laughing as she got dirt on her jeans. A vibrant echo of the little girl who loved farmers markets and whispered secrets. A lot has changed, and yet so much has returned to how it should have been. The porch swing creaks softly as I settle in. From here, I can see the top of the hill behind the property. It's where Tom and I once built a little wooden bench, just far enough to feel like a world away. I haven't walked up there in a while, but maybe tomorrow I will. I think often about the woman I used to be, not long ago, but somehow a lifetime away. The one who sat alone in a nursing home room, forgotten. The one who had mistaken silence for strength. The one who confused sacrifice with value. That woman still lives inside me. But now she's protected, seen, honored, not erased. People assume justice means punishment, that it's loud or legal or final. But I've learned it can be quiet, steady, a return to center, a rebalancing, not revenge, but restoration. When I walk through my home now, I see a story not of loss, but of reclamation. Every photo is back on the wall. It's back with that. Spit clothers, the tablecloth Tom spilled wine on during our anniversary dinner, the one I couldn't bring myself to wash, still has the faintest blush of red. I kept it that way on purpose, because not everything is meant to be scrubbed clean. Some things are supposed to remain, to remind you of the life you lived, the love you fought for, the parts of yourself you refused to abandon. Jacob visits sometimes. He helps with the mail and mows the lawn when Sophie isn't around. He doesn't talk much during those visits, but he always stays for tea. We don't talk about the house anymore. We don't have to, he knows, and I've stopped needing him to say it out loud. One afternoon, he arrived with a photo album I hadn't seen in years. The one from the summer Sophie turned 10. As we flipped through the pages, he lingered on one picture. Me holding a basket of tomatoes in the garden, laughing at something off camera. "You look strong here," he said, his voice soft. "I was strong," I answered. "I just forgot for a while." He nodded, then closed the album gently, like he understood what that strength had cost me, and what it had taught us both. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The wind carries the faint sound of a child laughing in the distance, a neighbor's little girl chasing a kite. I smile. This house, my house, isn't just wood and walls. It's proof of what was taken, of what I took back, of who I became in the quiet aftermath. Some people spend their lives shouting to be heard. I found power in the silence they left me with, because when everything was stripped away, my perceived family, my comfort, my identity, what remained was someone I hadn't met in years. Me, Eleanor Jennings, daughter, mother, wife, survivor, and now a woman reborn, not through rage, but through resolve, not through war, but through wisdom. They abandoned me, thinking I'd fade. But instead, I bloomed.